Jay Horwitz, another edition of Amazing Conversation with a friend I've known for 30 years, Todd. I'm old, you're old. Todd Ehrlich, the
Ooh.
author of a great new book, The 20 Greatest Moments in New York City Sports History. And I've known Todd as a sports producer for ABC, NBC, and recently WPIX. Todd, how many on-air towns the town that we worked together? It was Len Berman, uh, Scott Clark, Steve Overmeyer,
Corey
McFerrin,
McFerrin, Odious, the Moose.
Yeah,
I've
you
worked
just
with a lot
hired
of
the
people.
Moose
Len
and
Berman.
former Met Nelson Figueroa at PIX. Two good guys,
Yep,
two good
sure.
guys, down to earth
Ah,
guys. But
great
we
guys.
go back a long way. Do you remember me calling you pitching stories to you through the years? This is Jay from the Mets. I have a story for you.
Jay, I do. And would you indulge a quick Jay Horwitz impersonation, which is horrible? Okay, with some of the tough days with the Mets, with some of the drugs in the early 90s, you go, Todd, Jay here from the Mets. Todd, do me a favor, Todd. Could you put the story in a positive light, Todd?
Yeah,
Positive
it's one of
light.
my favorite words back there. Positive light, Todd. Positive light.
We're journalists. We just have to tell the story as it is, my friend.
Not really, Todd. We can fudge it a little bit, Todd. We can fudge it.
For you, Jay, we would fudge it. For no one else.
So your 20 moments go back to 1960, right? Because I got nervous because I didn't see Bobby Thompson say, "Hey, before I forget, your book's available at Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, where all good books are sold. You're like a second printing already, right, Todd?"
Second printing actually has under 100 books left. So the third printing is in the offing.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, Jay.
So the Mets had three entries on your list. Number 5 was the 1969 World Series. 7 was the 86 World Series, games 6 and 7. And 11 was the 9/11 game, 9/21 game after the first game back in 9/11. First, I got to ask you, who's number 21? Who fell off the list?
So here's the story, Jay. It's an interesting story. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of the team that plays across town. And
no, you can't say that. Not on this podcast. No good.
If I mention that name, am I all of a sudden immediately taken off the pod?
No. We'll let you go. One mention is good. One mention is good.
Right,
let me hold a copy of the book, Tom,
say the name, though.
Just a copy of the book, guys.
Oh, that's great. Jay, here.
Go ahead.
I'll share a copy of the book as well. I'm good like that. Thank you, Jay. There was a guy, don't judge him. His name's Aaron from across town at 62 home runs. We had to add that to the book.
Right, I got you.
What fell off the book was Connors and Crick's team, which happened right next to Shea at the U.S. Open.
Yeah.
And my publisher said, okay, we've got to kill that chapter. I said, no way. I worked hard on that chapter. So, Jay, people go to Amazon and they buy the book today. They get 21 chapters for the price.
It's a bonus, Todd. It's a bonus.
It's a bonus.
So let me still. You know what I like the way you approach the book. You did before and after interviews. He did a great Peter Body, help you write some stories. So in '69, for me, the most amazing thing about the championship was so unexpected. Team had lost over 100 games 5 years before. I think it was 16 games below 500 in '68. What was your impression of speaking? I know you spoke to Swoboda and Shamsky and those guys. What was your impression, of that team, from the interviews you did and what they overcame?
I got to be honest with you, Jay. I thought it was a miracle. It was a miracle. How did these Mets win a World Series? It's the only word I could come up with, but I don't think I'm the first person to come up with it, Jay. I think other people called it a miracle. Let me go into that, but let me just quickly say that the way the book was structured, I wrote it with the great Gary Myers.
David Tyree of the Helmet fame. Yeah.
Yep, David Tyree did the foreword, and Peter Body did an article on each of the moments.
Yeah,
so
I great reporter,
different voices in the book, and I couldn't have come up with better people. Let's get to those miracle Mets. like you said, they
I
never
think
finished above ninth place in the National League. And back then, Jay, as you remember, there was only 10 teams. 69 was only their seventh year in existence. The 62 Mets only won 40 games. They were the lovable losers. Even when they jumped to 73 wins, like you alluded to in 68, the expectations were not high in 69. And
right.
as deep into the summer as August 16th, the Mets were 13 games above 500, a miracle. I didn't coin the phrase, but I'm going to use it. But still 9 games back of the Cubbies in the third place tie with the defending champions, the Cardinals from St. Louis. So I asked Art Shamsky about that, and he said miracles come from nowhere. This is a quote, but all of a sudden you start believing. The reality was we started to play great baseball. And then we were unbeatable from about the third week of August on. We won 100 games. Jay, they won 100 games during that 69 regular season. Most people forget that. And I'd like to take you back to September 9th. Do you remember the Black Cat?
I do. In front of Leo DeRoche, it scared him crazy.
It was unbelievable. So it's Fergie Jenkins against Tom Seaver. Talk about a marquee matchup of aces. This was a statement game, but the Black Cat made the statement. Ron Swoboda said to me, the Black Cat came out of no place, running up and down, like you said, in front of the great Leo DeRocha. And he said, times like kissing your sister. And it was as if the cat and the Mets had worked with the cat to perform like that. He said this cat was terrifying, totally
Seaver
out of its
told me he
mind.
was his cat, Todd.
Oh, it's his cat?
It was Seaver. No, I'm just kidding, Todd. I'm just
You
kidding.
never admitted that to me, Jay. I needed you for the book.
Yeah.
He said this cat was crazy.
Yeah.
And he said in the Mets dugout, they were going, this is an omen. This is classic. And the Mets won the game 7-1. And in the Windy City, they had the curse of the Billy Goat from some other team. And now the curse of the Black Cat from the amazing Miracle Mets.
Hey, Todd, and Mike speaking to the guys, they give Gil Hodges like 102% credit for everything. The way he used the roster, you alluded to some of the interviews. He played all 25 guys: Al Weiss, Rod Gaspar, J.C. Martin. They all played a part, and the Cubs played the same lineup every day. And I think they wore down at the end. I think there's part of the stuff you had in your book too.
Yeah, they said that the players weren't thrilled about it, but they wouldn't have won without him platooning players. They said he was an absolute genius. And like you said, Jay, you're pretty good at this. You should be a Mets historian.
I'm my next job. I'm going to do that. I think.
You
Todd.
do that, Jay. And Jay, if you're good at that, I think we should name the press box after you.
Well,
That would be the right thing to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm just saying, in
Thank you.
honor of your knowledge and what you've
Yeah.
done for the organization. But again, these are just ideas I've got.
Yeah, it was
So
good.
the Mets finished 38-11 down the stretch, while the cursed of the Black Cat, the cursed Cubbies, limped in 16-25. Why? Because of what you just said. Because they played their players every day. The Mets were fresh. Like I said, the Mets won 11 games. They go on to sweep the Braves in the NLCS because that was the first year that they split it up and they had an NLCS. The division winner didn't just advance to the World Series. And think about miracles, Jay. Just 78 days after the miracle of man walking on the moon, the New York Metropolitans were headed to the World Series.
Right.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
They knew you were going to write a book about it, Todd. That's why they did it for you.
Well, what's weird is without them, it would have gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. But the good news is if we just eliminated 5, Connors and Crixley would be back in the official book.
Okay. But let me go back. Let me jump ahead to number 786.
Well,
skip 6, 7.
there's a couple more things I just want.
Go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Sure.
I just want to share a couple more things about that. They faced the Baltimore Orioles, which are an absolute powerhouse and won 109 games. That year, they featured obviously 2 20-game winners, and Dave McNally and Mike Cuellar. In game 1, Brooks Robinson known as the human vacuum cleaner, said, quote, "We're here to prove there's no Santa Claus."
Right.
This is when Gil Hodges showed his genius. Again, going back to what you said, Jay. Gil Hodges gathered his team after game one and told them, quote, "To not try to do too much. Just be yourself. You'll be fine." Guess what? Game two, Kuzmin, unhittable. Game three, Agee saved 5 runs with a pair of catches for the ages, if you'll allow me.
Yes, sir.
Ron Swoboda made the catch of his life as the Mets won in extras in game four. That game five, they finalized the miracle. And what's interesting is, and obviously you know, but some of your fans may not know, who made the last out for the Orioles in that World Series?
Earl Weaver.
Well, probably because he said Davy Johnson up to the plate, and Davy Johnson became the manager of who? The New York Mets in '86.
See, let me give you an inside story. Davey knew 14 years later he's going to be hired by the Mets, so he took a dive and made out on purpose. That makes sense?
That's why I did it?
Yeah, that he knew.
Brilliant. And you'll hear later, Darling says he's a genius.
Yeah,
We'll get to that.
So,
I just wanted to share a couple more things about this. The final out, Ron Swoboda said to me, quote, "You know, the last catch in game 5 of the '69 World Series, Davey swore he hit it hard enough to head out. Although, obviously, we know from Jay, we got the scoop, he was lying.
yeah,
He obviously threw it so he could become manager. But when Clan went back, he saw it looked like it was staying in the yard. You know, when it was caught, it was just electric. It was an iconic moment." He goes, he'll never, ever forget. Art Shamsky said people who weren't even born talk about their parents and their grandparents. He says it's really funny because he's probably had 100,000 people come up to him and tell him that they were at Shea Stadium on October 16th,
right.
1969. He goes, "I think that's great because the ballpark held about 53,000.
Right.
So 47,000 of those people are telling the truth." And they went on to say, "We beat a team that was really terrific in Baltimore. They won 109 games. So the miracle nickname really fits for that team." And think about things come in three, Jays. Within 9 months, Jets miracle Super Bowl III, victory over Baltimore. Man walked on the moon, and the Mets beat the Orioles in the World Series. Right. I mean, just incredible, Jay. Right. Incredible. Right.
So let's jump to '86 for a couple of minutes.
Let's do it.
And one thing that stuck out, the chapter you had was, to me, one of the most overlooked guys on a team was Ray Knight. And Ray was kind of the backbone of the enforcer. It was one particular game, which you alluded to, in Cincinnati, when Eric Davis slid into him hard at third base, and Ray got up and clocked him. Big fight. Kevin Mitchell, Strawberry were all kicked out. Jesse Orozco and McDowell wound up playing in the outfield, and that one game is kind of why that team never gave up, even when we were down in the World Series. And I just felt the chapter you had on Ray gives him a lot of props, a lot of people overlook. But tell me your observation about 6 and 7, Todd.
Well, I've got a lot of observations, but I want to start where you were. There were 3 real leaders on that team. Keith Hernandez, the kid, Gary Carter, and Ray Knight. And like you said, Ray Knight, the fight that he showed, he was 17-0 as a Golden Glove boxer, but the way he played the game with such intensity was infused because if you remember, that was a young team. 83 Strawberry was the Rookie of the Year. 84 Doc was the Rookie of the Year. They were a young team. They needed that leadership. Ray Knight provided it. On the night you talk about, it's emblematic on this team. And Strawberry ends my chapter by talking about the fight that team had in them. But Ray Knight was not going to take any guff. So the brawl breaks out. The next day, he shows up to the ballpark. A couple of the guys walk up to him in the clubhouse and said, "Did you see the paper this morning?" He's like, "No, what?" He showed it to him. Dave Parker said, "If I knew where Ray Knight was standing, I would have gone to his hotel. I would have kicked his bleepity bleep." Ray Knight threw on a T-shirt, ran out to the field. And I mean, Ray Knight was not the biggest guy. Dave
No.
Parker was a mountain of a man. Said, "Hey, big fella, I read what you wrote. You got something to say? You want to do something? Let's go now." Dave Parker wanted no part of Ray Knight. He goes, "Hey, I got to say that stuff in the media. I got to say that stuff in the media. I didn't mean any of it. You're my guy. You're my guy."
Yeah.
Shook his hand. Ray Knight turns around to walk to the dugout. He said half the team was out to watch the show.
Yeah, Ray was tough. So, the one takeaway, and let's just go again. For me, after the Buckner Mookie thing in Game 6, two things. People thought we won the World Series that night. We had to come back and win Game 7. And that, Mookie and Buckner became really close friends after that. And it pained Mookie that Buckner got a lot of criticism for missing the ball. And Mookie always tells people, try to take some of the heat off for Buckner. He would have beaten the ball out anyway. So, what were your takeaways on the whole stuff, Todd?
So I've got a million takeaways. I want to work my way. I'll do it quickly. I'll start with the World Series. I heard something super interesting that I never heard before. I asked Ron Darling. I said, "What was the turning point at that World Series?" Obviously, he's going to tell me Mookie Wilson. Au contraire, mon frere. He says to me, Davy Johnson not only had a brilliant mind, this is a quote, but he also knew his team, he knew his ball players. We have been through a grueling stretch against Houston in the NLCS. And remember, Houston had Mike Scott ready to go in Game 7. They were 3-0 in the ninth of Game 6 to eliminate the Mets. The Mets tied it. They went on to win in 16. So Darling went on to tell me the first two games of the World Series, we were flat. Darling wasn't flat. He pitched out of his mind in Game 1. But they didn't score. No run support behind him. Because sometimes a manager has to go to the whip. Sometimes a manager has to give a team a hug. That's kind of what he did. He gave a hug to 25 guys. He let them rest for Game 3. It was a critical decision made by a brilliant manager. So that backs up your point. So then to what you were talking about, Jay, the Mookie Wilson at bat. So and exactly what you were saying about the fight the team had. I asked Straw, and he goes, "Our attitude that year was never say die. We kept coming back and winning. That was just the fight in us." Mookie Wilson, when I asked him, his first response to me was, "Oh man, that was a long at bat." Yeah, you better believe it was. It was a 10-pitch at bat. Ron Darling said, this is also another story which I never knew. I was sent home by pitching coach Mel Stoudemire after the last out at the bottom of the 8th inning. Because in those days, it took about 2 hours before you could leave the stadium after World Series because there were 55,000 fans. It was impossible to move. It was gridlock. Stoudemire thought it'd be a good idea to send him home, Ron said and relax because he was starting Game 7. He told me before I left, we're going to win this game. Because I don't think he knew how we were going to win it. I don't think anybody did, including Mookie. He goes, I got on the Grand Central Parkway. Of course, I'm listening to Bob Murphy, the Mets, voice of the Mets. I knew right away after Dave Henderson's home run, I needed to come back. Whether we won or lost, I had to be with my teammates. I ended up getting back when Keith Hernandez made the second out. I watched the rest of the game from Charlie Samuel's office. He was our equipment manager. This is where you come in, Jay. Of course, you come into all these stories. Keith Hernandez. I made the second out of the inning. I certainly didn't want to see Boston having fun on our field, Keith Hernandez said to me. So I went up briefly to the clubhouse. Gerald Johnson was their advanced scout, ironically, a former manager of the Red Sox. And Jay Horwitz, that's you, my dear friend and esteemed colleague, was in Davey's office. I sat down in one of the chairs. Everything started happening. I wasn't going to get off that chair because we were 1 out away from elimination. They ended up 1 strike away from elimination. Superstitious as I am, we like to say that chair had hits in it. So here's the thing, Jay. Did you know Darling was in the clubhouse? Because neither Keith nor Ron knew that.
I did. Later on, I did. Not right away. Later on, I did.
And what
See,
was that
Charlie's
like?
office was on the other end from Davey's office, so he was right by the
Jay,
trading
what
room.
was that like watching that historic at bat with Keith Hernandez?
I was trying to think to myself, how are we going to apologize and make good to the people? Team that won 114 games was hated by all the other teams, didn't fulfill its quest and win the whole title. How are we going to? What are we going to say? Then all of a sudden, Kevin Mitchell, Gary Carter, Mookie Wilson, we win the game.
You certainly do. Ken Davidoff picks up the story here, Jay. John McNamara's decision to leave Buckner in the bottom of the 10th inning of Game 6 of the 86 World Series ranks as one of the least defensible decisions in sports history. I think the pun's intended. I got to talk to Davidoff about that. Because everyone knew how banged up Buckner was. McNamara lifted Buckner for defensive replacement Dave Stapleton in each of the Red Sox 7 postseason victories that fall. McNamara defended his decision in 2011, saying Buckner was, quote, the best first baseman I had, which of course begs the question why he lifted Buckner in all of the other games. Davidoff wraps up by saying they might have picked up their 8th had McNamara done the same in Game 6 and won the World Series. Mookie Wilson told me it was the at-bat of my career. He goes, quote, even though it may not have been as flamboyant as guys hitting home runs, the results were really, really big. He goes, I learned you put your best foot forward every day, you see what happens. I did nothing different. I always ran balls out. I teach that to my son, Jagger. I mean, that's just the way I was raised and the way I was raising Jagger. That's the way I was taught to play the game. Darling said when the ball went through Buckner's legs, like most people, I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe what happened. Those are the kind of things that don't even happen in a college game. When the ball went through Buckner's legs, Strawberry said, I thought we have a chance. We have another day to play. We've got a chance to win Game 7, be champions, and not make Jay explain how they didn't win it all. John Harper went on to say it was fitting for a team that believed they couldn't lose. They bullied the National League from start to finish, winning 100 games in the regular season and 116 overall, of course, and making enemies along the way with their big personalities. They were boisterous home run celebrations and their willingness to brawl the opponent. Keith Hernandez says, quote, and he's seen a lot of World Series. I think it's the greatest single comeback in World Series history with the game on the line. Darryl Strawberry, to back up what Jerry Horowitz says, it just showed the everlasting fight we had inside each
That's
and every
great.
one of us.
There's good memories, Todd. Hey, could we jump to number 11?
Let's
9/11, 9/11 game, 9/21. For me, it stands out from your pages again. A lot of the guys didn't want to play the game. The prevailing sentiment in the clubhouse was, is it too soon to play? Security was just tremendous around there. I mean, it was like an armed fortress here. And again, we had about 30,000 people to see Mike's home run. People tell you it'd be like 90,000. There wasn't 90,000 people there. It was about 30,000. But prevailing, looking back on, I can't believe it's 23 years now, is that a lot of our guys didn't want to play, didn't know what to expect, didn't know how they would proceed. Two quick things from my end. Like Diana Ross singing the national anthem, and Liza Minnelli singing New York, New York, and Jay Payton, and he gets a hug from Jay Payton. Once you talk, again, all that stuff is in your book.
It sure is. And if I could, just for a second, um, let's just take a quick step back to the bus ride, because these are stories I obviously didn't know about, and Todd Zeal was
Right.
generous enough to share. Said on the way back, this is after 9/11, so of course they couldn't fly back. They took a bus. In the middle of the night, the guys were talking about the day's events of what happened at 9/11. So they got to the GW Bridge right around 2 in the morning. Said there was no traffic on the road. As a matter of fact, they had to be escorted across the bridge. They went very slowly. Said the entire team gathered on the right side of the bridge to look downtown where the towers stood. There was only floodlights shining. He said it was one of the most powerful sights he'd ever seen. He said even that high up, there was a smell of an electrical fire in the air. He goes, there was not a sound on the bus. The only sound were some of the guys that had direct ties to New York City and to the fire department feel that they had lost loved ones or friends. He said for the next 30 minutes, from the GW Bridge to the parking lot at Shea, it was literally silent. He said what they were watching on TV didn't seem real. And in 1 second, in 1 New York minute, it became real. Now let's go to exactly what you were saying. Jim Duquette told me they almost didn't play the game.
Yeah.
There was considerable pushback from players in the clubhouse because of security. He was assistant GM at the time. He said Al Leiter and John Franco were the leaders of the team, and John Franco in particular knew what it would mean to New York and how important it would be because he was a New Yorker. But it wasn't until they got the insurances that, like you said, from the NYPD, that the security would be super tight, that the players decide to play the game. And he went on to say that it was the most iconic game, Jim Duquette, in the history of the Mets organization outside of Game 6 from the World Series, because they were iconic for completely different reasons, obviously. Then, Jay, you're really good at this stuff. The other thing I wrote about was Jay Payton. He said, my own special moment was Liza Minnelli, and he got a big hug from her after she sang New York, New York. He said he was the first guy up in that inning, so he was standing there. He said his mom, which I didn't know, actually sent that picture off to Liza, and she autographed it for him.
He's got that hanging up in his room.
To this day. Yep.
He's got the picture hanging up in his room.
And he went on to say, I'm sorry, Jay, did I cut you off?
No, he's got that picture hanging up in his room with him and Liza Minnelli.
Right, it's wonderful, signed. Jay went on to say, it's great that we played. It's kind of like showing them, hey, we're strong. We're not going to run and hide and stay sheltered because that happened. And it showed it was the right decision. It gave everybody a minute just to forget, and that's what people needed. Omar Minaya said he was at the game. He was able to watch with a friend of his who was at the World Trade Center on 9/11 and just happened to be in the last elevator of the second building. He was still shaken by the whole event 10 days later. But they said, we're going to play baseball. We're going to play baseball. We're going to get through this. We're going to move on. It helped them. And Jay, you'll remember the NYPD and NYFD hats. Well, Todd Zeal was the team spokesman. He said he had a lot of pride in wearing those hats. He said he was instrumental in getting them because when he was at Ground Zero, he traded a Mets hat for NYPD.
Right.
In Pittsburgh, they wore them. Well, the league told them that they were in violation of the uniform policy and they weren't allowed to wear them because he was the player rep. He was the one that was quoted. He said, you could try to come down here and take those off our heads. He said, on this game in question at Shea, when we took the field wearing the NYPD and FDNY hats, I remember the families and the first responders lining the field. And that was just such a powerful moment.
Todd, before we jump, I want to get one more thing before we get done here. Tell me what you have on Mike's home run. I know you spoke to him.
I did. What a humble guy. So he said to me, number one, I was just happy to come through in a big moment. The fact that a lot of people have made it a significant moment in their lives is an honor for me. I just try to honor that the best that I can. Todd Zeal had an interesting take. He goes, I almost felt like I wasn't surprised. I almost felt like it was supposed to happen. I wasn't jumping up and down. Eduardo Alfonso told me the home run meant a lot. It really meant a lot after what the city went through. He goes, I think it did something really nice for the fans. That's why Mike is one of the favorites in New York. Jay Payton summed it up this way. Because I think once you got to the stadium, you saw the energy, the love, all the fans, how it brought everybody together. It was the beginning of the healing. And then how it ended with Piazza hitting the home run, us winning the game, people being able to get back to the feeling of normal. In hindsight, it ended up the best thing we could have done playing that game.
Okay.
So
But
that's
before
why I
we
say
go, I
that
have a
that
ball
is
to
all
pick with you, Todd. Before we go, because we
I've
got
got
to
a bone
keep
to pick with you too, Jay.
go ball to pick with you. The number one pick. I was actually at the game, the 2008 Super Bowl, David Tyree's helmet catch. So the guy's a co-author of your book, and his number is number one. Come on, Todd. Come on. How could-
No,
that's not
cart before
that's
the horse, Jay.
what's that?
Cart before the horse. That's
Co-
the number one moment. Why?
What?
New England was about to become the first
I was at
19-0
that
team
game.
in
I'm a
NFL
gigantic Giant
history.
fan, Todd. So I'm
Yeah,
just kidding
they
you.
had the greatest. They had the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL, Tom Brady, on the other side. Nobody
Right. I
gave
was
them a
there.
chance to win the game, and it was a miracle catch. So after I made it number one, I asked Tyree to write the foreword. So he wrote the foreword for the book.
More than Tyree's catch was how Eli got out of the grass and threw the ball. That kind of gets lost in the stuff, but it was great. Listen, Todd, I just want to wish you all the best with your book. It's a great book, a longtime friend. Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, where all books are sold. And I wish you all the best. I hope you sell out again. Sell in another edition.